The cowboy paid $2 for a native girl. She warned him, "You'll regret this." "I won't obey." The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty plains, casting long golden rays across the small western town. The air smelled of earth, dry wood, and the faint tang of livestock. A young cowboy named Samuel rode slowly into town, his boots kicking up clouds of dust with every step of his horse. He had traveled many miles, driven by curiosity and the restless energy that always seemed to follow him. Life on the open plains was lonely, and Samuel often sought new experiences, even if they brought trouble. Samuel's horse snorted and pawed at the ground as they neared the center of town. The streets were quiet, mostly empty, except for the early risers, a blacksmith tending his forge, a shopkeeper sweeping the front of his store, and a few children running barefoot, chasing each other with laughter that echoed off the wooden buildings. Samuel's eyes scanned the town with mild interest, noting the small trading post at the edge of the square. He had heard stories from travelers about this place, how it was a hub for trade, gossip, and strange happenings. He dismounted and led his horse toward the post, curiosity pulling him forward. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco, leather, and old wood. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with tools, fabrics, and various goods from near and far. Samuel's eyes wandered until they landed on a small group gathered at one corner of the room. There, standing quietly with a mixture of pride and defiance, was a native girl. Her dark hair was braided neatly down her back, and her eyes were sharp, observing everything with careful attention. Her presence was calm but commanding, as if she carried an invisible strength that made others pause. A man, rough and thick-set, was speaking to a few onlookers. He pointed toward the girl and announced that she was available for purchase. Samuel froze for a moment. He had heard of such things before in hushed whispers and old stories, but seeing it happen in person made his stomach twist. The price was small, just $2, but the weight of the decision felt enormous. The girl looked directly at him when their eyes met. There was no fear in her gaze, only clarity and resolve. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, yet with a tone that carried far more power than her words suggested. "I won't obey." Samuel blinked, surprised by her courage. He had expected fear, hesitation, maybe even tears. Instead, he saw fire in her eyes. He laughed nervously, trying to hide the unease that settled in his chest. He told himself that she was just scared, that she didn't understand the world yet, and that she would eventually comply. With a shrug, he handed over the $2. The man accepted the money and gestured for Samuel to take the girl with him. She did not resist physically, but her expression made it clear that she would not yield easily. Samuel felt a mix of triumph and unease as he led her out of the trading post. The townsfolk watched silently, some whispering among themselves, others shaking their heads. Samuel tried to ignore the looks, but a small part of him wondered if he had made a mistake. As they walked through the town, the girl remained silent. She kept her eyes on the ground at first, then gradually began to lift her gaze, observing the world around her with sharp curiosity. Samuel tried to start a conversation, asking her name and where she came from, but she responded with short answers, careful and measured. Every word she spoke seemed deliberate, and Samuel realized that she was testing him, sizing him up, understanding who he really was. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun was higher in the sky, and the dust clung to their clothes and skin. Samuel's horse seemed restless, and he could feel tension building in the air. He led the girl to a small clearing near a creek, where he planned to set up camp for the night. As he worked to unload supplies and prepare the horse, he stole glances at her. She was quiet, watching him with an intensity that was almost unsettling. Finally, he decided to speak again. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "This place is safe. You'll be fine." The girl looked at him, her eyes sharp and unwavering.
"I am not afraid," she replied, "and I will not be controlled."
"You cannot buy my obedience with money." Samuel felt a pang of guilt and frustration. He had expected compliance, but he realized now that this girl was not like anyone he had ever met. Her words were calm but firm, and they echoed in his mind long after she spoke. He tried to dismiss them, telling himself that she would come around, but a small, uncomfortable truth lingered. He could not simply dominate her will. That evening, as the sky turned pink and orange and the first stars began to appear, Samuel built a fire. The girl sat at a distance, watching silently. He offered her some bread and water, but she shook her head politely, refusing. Samuel felt a strange mix of anger and admiration. How could someone so young and seemingly powerless possess such strength? As night fell and the fire crackled, Samuel reflected on the day's events. He had thought that money could give him control, that purchasing someone would make them obey. But he was beginning to see that real power was not so simple. The girl's warning rang in his ears. "You'll regret this. I won't obey." He realized that he did not fully understand her world, her strength, or the lessons she might teach him. The night was silent, except for the crackling fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Samuel lay on his bedroll, staring at the stars, wondering what he had truly brought into his life. Across the fire, the girl sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching him carefully. Neither spoke, but a quiet understanding seemed to pass between them. This was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, a story of conflict, respect, and change that would challenge everything Samuel thought he knew about power, freedom, and human dignity. By the time sleep claimed him, Samuel knew one thing for certain. He had not bought obedience, and he was about to learn that some lessons could not be paid for with money. The girl had entered his life like a storm, quiet at first, but with a force that would not be ignored. And as the moon rose high over the plains, Samuel understood, deep down, that her warning was only the beginning. The next morning the sun rose slowly, casting a warm golden light over the camp. The cowboy, Samuel, stirred from his bedroll and glanced at the girl. She was already awake, sitting quietly a few feet away, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she could see things no one else could. Her calm demeanor was unsettling, and Samuel felt a strange mix of frustration and admiration. He had thought that bringing her to his camp meant control, that she would follow his orders without question. But already he realized that was far from the truth. Samuel started the fire and prepared a simple breakfast of beans and bread. He looked at the girl and offered her some, but she shook her head, her expression firm but polite. "I can take care of myself," she said. Her words were simple, yet they carried weight, a quiet assertion that she would not be dominated. Samuel sighed. He had expected compliance, but every day with her was proving that he could not simply impose his will. After breakfast, Samuel attempted to start a conversation, hoping to understand her better. "Where are you from?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Your people. What village did you come from?" The girl looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes steady. "I am from the plains. My family is strong. They taught me to survive, to be careful, and to never let fear control me." Samuel nodded slowly, realizing that her life had been very different from his own. He had grown up on the open plains too, but his world was one of rules, money, and possession. Her world was different, one where respect and strength were earned, not bought. He felt a twinge of guilt for thinking he could simply purchase obedience with a few coins. The girl stood and began to move around the camp, gathering small pieces of wood for the fire, checking the water supply and inspecting their surroundings. Samuel watched her, noticing how precise and careful she was. Every action seemed intentional, every movement deliberate. She was not just surviving. She was commanding the environment in her own quiet way. Samuel realized that he could learn from her. He had always thought of himself as skilled, experienced, capable of handling the wild alone. But here was someone, younger than him, showing independence, skill, and determination. He felt a mixture of pride and unease. Pride because he had acquired someone so capable, and unease because he could not control her as he had expected. By mid-morning, Samuel decided to teach her some tasks, hoping to establish authority. "We need to check the horses," he said. "You can help me feed and water them." The girl followed him silently, but she did not act as he expected. Instead of following his instructions blindly, she suggested small improvements. "If you tie the rope here, the horse won't pull so much," she said. "And if you give them the water first, they will be calmer for feeding." Samuel paused, surprised. He had not considered these ideas, and he realized she was right. His hands were rough and experienced, but her observations were sharp, precise, and practical. He felt a growing respect for her intelligence, though his pride resisted admitting it. The day passed with tension and small victories. The cowboy tried to assert control, giving commands and expecting obedience. The girl, however, maintained her independence, refusing to act against her own judgment. Yet she was not confrontational. Instead, she acted in ways that subtly challenged him, teaching lessons without raising her voice. Samuel noticed this and began to reflect on his own behavior. He had believed that money could buy submission, but he was learning that respect and understanding could not be purchased. By late afternoon, Samuel's frustration was evident. He sat by the fire rubbing his forehead while the girl gathered more wood and tended to the horses. He watched her work, noticing the care she took with each task, the quiet strength in her movements. She was teaching him patience, the value of observation, and the importance of listening. As the sun began to set, Samuel decided to test her resolve further. "You could make things easier," he said, trying to assert authority. "If you followed my instructions, everything would go smoothly." The girl paused and looked at him, her eyes steady and unwavering. "I will do what is right," she said simply. "Not what is easiest, and not what someone else tells me to do. I cannot obey blindly, and I will not pretend to be someone I am not." Samuel felt a pang in his chest. Her words were honest and unyielding, and they cut through his assumptions. He realized that his expectations were rooted in a world that valued control and ownership, but her world valued freedom, choice, and strength. He had underestimated her, and now he was beginning to understand the true lesson she carried with her. That evening, as darkness fell over the plains, Samuel and the girl sat by the fire. The stars were bright and scattered across the sky, casting a faint glow over the camp. Samuel thought about the day's events, the way she had refused to obey blindly, the way she had taught him small lessons without speaking harshly, and the quiet power she held. He realized that he had been wrong to think that money could control a human spirit. The girl, noticing his silence, spoke softly. "You cannot control me, and I will not follow blindly. But we can work together. If you learn to listen, to respect, you may find that life is easier than forcing it." Samuel nodded slowly. Her words sank in. He felt a mix of humility and admiration. She was teaching him more than he could have imagined. Lessons about patience, respect, and the limits of his own understanding. The night grew colder, and Samuel built the fire higher, offering warmth for both of them. The girl remained quiet, but her presence was comforting. There was a sense of understanding developing between them, a fragile bond that was still new but promising. Samuel knew that the journey ahead would not be simple. He would have to confront his pride, his assumptions, and his understanding of what it meant to have power over someone. As he lay on his bedroll, staring up at the stars, Samuel thought about the first time he had met her. Her warning echoed in his mind. "You'll regret this. I won't obey." At first he had dismissed it, thinking it was fear or bravado. But now, after a full day of learning from her, he understood that her words were not threats. They were truths. She had a spirit that could not be tamed by money, by fear, or by authority. Sleep came slowly, with Samuel reflecting on the lessons of the day. He realized that the girl had entered his life not to be controlled, but to teach him. She was strong, intelligent, and independent, and he could either resist her lessons or learn from them. He chose to try to learn, though he knew it would not be easy. The next morning the sun rose again, painting the plains in hues of gold and amber. Samuel woke with a new sense of purpose. The girl was already up, tending to the horses with the same quiet skill and precision as before. He watched her work and felt a growing respect for her resilience and courage. He understood that this journey would not be one of ownership or control, but of understanding, trust, and perhaps mutual respect. The day continued with small lessons and quiet challenges. Samuel found himself listening more, observing more, and questioning his own assumptions. The girl, in turn, maintained her independence, offering guidance when necessary, but never submitting blindly. Their relationship was evolving, slowly but surely, into something neither of them had expected. A partnership built on respect rather than fear, on understanding rather than control. By evening, Samuel felt a strange sense of gratitude. He had entered the camp thinking he was the one in control, but he realized that he was learning more than he had ever imagined. The girl's warning had been true. He could not control her, but in trying to understand her, he was discovering a new way to see the world, to see others, and to see himself. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Samuel knew that this was only the beginning. The lessons were just starting, and the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, revelations, and growth. He had underestimated the girl's strength, but now he understood that her spirit was a force that could not be ignored. And as he drifted to sleep, he felt a quiet anticipation for the days to come, knowing that the girl had changed his life in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. The morning was crisp, with a gentle wind blowing across the plains. Samuel woke early, as usual, but he noticed something different in the air that day. A sense of quiet anticipation, as if the land itself held its breath. The girl was already awake, sitting on a small rock near the creek, her dark hair glinting in the early sunlight. She seemed calm, yet alert, watching the horizon as though she could sense things Samuel could not. Samuel stretched and rubbed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache of muscles still sore from travel. He glanced at her and felt a strange mixture of admiration and unease. Her presence was commanding, not in a loud or aggressive way, but quietly, insistently. He had come to recognize that she was not just strong in body but strong in mind, and that strength made him reconsider everything he thought he knew about control and authority. After a simple breakfast, Samuel decided it was time to teach her something practical about living on the plains. "We need to check the traps today," he said, pointing toward a nearby area where he had set small snares for rabbits. "If we work together, we can catch enough food for a few days." The girl followed silently, but she did not move as he expected. Instead of merely doing what he said, she watched each trap carefully, examining it for signs of recent activity. She pointed out places where the traps might fail, places where small animals could escape, and even suggested minor adjustments to improve their chances. Samuel stopped and looked at her. "You really know what you're doing," he admitted, a note of surprise in his voice. I didn't expect this." She met his gaze steadily. "Experience is not just in years," she said quietly. "It is in paying attention, in learning from what happens, and in acting carefully. I have learned from my family, from the land, and from every step I have taken." Samuel felt a strange pang in his chest. Her words were simple, but they carried weight, a quiet lesson in humility. He had thought that skill came from strength and authority, but she was proving otherwise. Her confidence was not arrogance. It was the result of observation, experience, and self-reliance. As they moved from trap to trap, Samuel realized that she was teaching him as much as he was teaching her. She showed him new ways to notice tracks in the dirt, how to identify subtle changes in the environment, and how to predict the movement of animals. Samuel began to follow her guidance, and for the first time, he felt the satisfaction of learning something meaningful from someone he had underestimated. Mid-morning brought an unexpected challenge. A sudden storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds sweeping across the plains with surprising speed. The wind picked up, whipping dust and dry grass into their faces, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Samuel felt a surge of panic. His mind raced with concerns about the horses, the traps, and their shelter. But the girl remained calm. She moved quickly, securing the traps, gathering supplies, and guiding Samuel to a natural shelter formed by rocks and a small overhang. She worked decisively, her movements precise and efficient, and for the first time, Samuel felt completely dependent on her judgment. "You need to stay low and protect the horses," she instructed, her voice calm but firm. "I will handle the rest. Follow me." Samuel did as she said, his heart pounding with both fear and awe. He watched as she took charge, organizing their supplies, ensuring the horses were safe, and checking their surroundings for hazards. Her ability to remain composed in a crisis amazed him, and he felt a growing respect that went beyond simple admiration. It was a recognition of her true strength. The storm raged for hours, heavy rain turning the ground into slippery mud, lightning flashing across the sky and thunder shaking the plains. Samuel huddled under the rock overhang, shivering, while the girl worked tirelessly. She moved with purpose, never complaining, never hesitating, and every action she took kept them safe. When the storm finally passed, the sun began to break through the clouds, casting light over the wet, glistening landscape. Samuel emerged from the shelter, feeling exhausted but relieved. He looked at the girl, who stood drenched but triumphant, and realized that her warning from the very first day had been true. She was not someone to be controlled, but someone to be respected. "You saved us," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and humility. I didn't expect you to handle that so well." She smiled faintly, not in arrogance, but in quiet confidence. "I told you," she said softly, "you cannot control me with money, fear, or orders. But if you learn to listen, to watch, and to respect, you will find help in unexpected places." Samuel felt a deep shift within himself. Her actions had changed the dynamic between them. No longer was she simply a girl he had purchased for $2. She was a partner, a teacher, and a force that challenged him to rethink everything he had believed about power and authority. The following days continued in a similar pattern. Samuel attempted to assert his authority at times, giving instructions or expecting compliance, but the girl consistently acted with independence. She challenged him gently but firmly, demonstrating skills, knowledge, and insight that he could not match. Every time he tried to dominate, he learned that her strength lay in her calm, careful intelligence, not in resistance alone. One afternoon, while checking the traps again, Samuel asked her about her family. "Your people, what do they think of all this?" he inquired, genuinely curious. The girl paused, considering her words. "They taught me to survive, to value freedom, and to respect the land. They would not be angry at me for resisting control. They would be proud that I remain true to myself. Obedience without choice is not strength, it is weakness." Samuel listened, absorbing her words. He realized that his entire worldview had been limited, shaped by a society that valued possession over understanding, fear over respect. Her words were simple, but their meaning was profound. She was teaching him that strength and leadership were not about dominating others. They were about listening, observing, and respecting. As the days passed, a quiet bond began to form between them. It was not friendship in the conventional sense, nor was it based on authority or ownership. Instead, it was built on mutual respect, trust, and the recognition of each other's strengths. Samuel began to rely on her judgment, following her guidance in ways he had never imagined he would. And she, in turn, began to share stories, lessons, and advice, teaching him about her world, her people, and the principles that had shaped her. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Samuel found himself speaking more openly than he had before. "I underestimated you," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I thought I could control you, but I see now that I was wrong. You are stronger than I imagined." The girl nodded, accepting his words without gloating. "Strength is not about control," she said softly. "It is about knowing who you are, staying true to yourself, and respecting others. You are learning, but there is still more to understand." Samuel felt a sense of humility he had never known. Her presence had challenged him in ways he could not have anticipated. He realized that his journey with her was about more than survival. It was about growth, understanding, and discovering what it truly meant to respect another person. By the time night fell, the plains were quiet again. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows over their faces. Samuel lay on his bedroll, thinking about the events of the past days, the storm, the lessons, the quiet challenges, and the growing respect he felt for the girl. He understood now that she had entered his life not to obey him but to teach him. As sleep approached, he reflected on the truth in her words. Obedience cannot be bought, and respect cannot be demanded. Both must be earned through understanding, patience, and humility. And as he drifted into dreams, he realized that the girl had changed not just his days, but his perspective on life itself. The next morning, the plains glistened with dew, and Samuel woke with a sense of purpose. He approached the girl with a quiet determination.
I want to learn, he said simply. I want to understand, not control.
Will you teach me? The girl looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. I will, she said. But you must remember, lessons cannot be forced, and change cannot be rushed. You will learn as much about yourself as you do about me. And so, their journey continued. The cowboy and the native girl, once divided by fear, money, and assumptions, now walked together in a fragile but growing partnership. Each day brought challenges, lessons, and discoveries, shaping both of them in ways neither could have imagined. Samuel understood that this was not just survival, it was transformation, and he was ready to face whatever lessons lay ahead. The days grew warmer, and the plains stretched endlessly under the bright sun. Samuel had begun to notice the small details around him, the way the wind moved the tall grasses, how the birds and small animals left patterns on the ground, and how water collected in small depressions after a rain. Every observation reminded him that life here was not something to control, but something to understand. And the girl, strong, quiet, and unwavering, was teaching him how to see the world differently. Yet, not all days were easy. Samuel's pride, long nurtured by years of independence and assumptions of authority, sometimes clashed with her determination. One afternoon, while checking the traps, he tried to assert himself more firmly. We need to move the horses closer to the creek, he said, pointing toward the distant water. If we leave them there, we'll have trouble finding them later, and it will take too much time to bring them back. The girl shook her head calmly. No, she said firmly. If you move them now, the ground will be soft and slippery. They could get hurt. We must wait until the soil dries and they are safe to move. Samuel felt a flush of irritation. He was used to giving commands and seeing them followed, but he stopped himself, watching her carefully. There was no anger in her eyes, no desire to defy him, only logic and foresight. He realized he had been acting on impulse, while she was thinking ahead, considering consequences he had not seen. He sighed and nodded. You're right, he admitted quietly, a little reluctantly. We'll wait. Over the next few hours, Samuel observed her closely. She had a way of moving through the land that seemed natural, almost as if she belonged to it. She could find water where none appeared to exist, identify plants that were safe to eat, and anticipate the weather changes with accuracy he could not match. He began to see that her strength was not just in resisting him. It was in knowledge, patience, and respect for the land. That evening, as they sat near the fire, Samuel asked her about her family. Your parents, he began slowly. Do they teach you these things?
Yes, she replied.
They taught me to be careful, to notice what others might not, and to make decisions that protect life. They taught me that strength comes from wisdom, not force. My people value choice and freedom above all. That is why I cannot obey blindly. That is why I must think for myself. Samuel listened, absorbing her words. He realized that his entire worldview had been narrow, shaped by society's ideas of power and ownership. She had grown up in a culture where respect was earned and freedom was sacred. Her perspective challenged everything he had believed about authority and obedience. The next morning, a new challenge arose. A neighboring group of settlers arrived near their camp, curious about the cowboy and the girl he had purchased. They were friendly enough, but made casual remarks about ownership and obedience, clearly assuming the girl would follow Samuel's orders without question. Samuel watched as the girl responded calmly and firmly. I make my own choices, she said simply. I act with reason and understanding, not because someone tells me to. The settlers exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected compliance, not quiet courage. Samuel felt a mix of pride and admiration. He realized that her strength was not meant to challenge him. It was meant to protect herself and teach others that true respect could not be demanded. As the days passed, Samuel's pride continued to confront him. At times he caught himself trying to assert control, only to realize that her wisdom and insight were far superior. He began to question his own decisions, understanding that survival and respect required listening, not commanding. The girl's patience was remarkable. She never scolded, never raised her voice, but guided him with quiet precision. One afternoon, while preparing a small meal near the creek, Samuel made a mistake. He tried to catch fish too quickly, spooking them away and wasting the time he had set aside for other tasks. Frustrated, he threw his hands up and muttered, I can't get this right. Nothing I do seems to work. The girl approached him calmly, her eyes steady. You are impatient, she said softly. Patience is part of learning. Force only creates failure. Watch the water. Wait for the fish to return and act when the moment is right. That is how the land teaches us. Samuel felt a mix of humility and awe. Her words were simple, yet their meaning was profound. He realized that she had been teaching him lessons not just about survival, but about life itself, about patience, observation, and respect for forces greater than himself. That night, after the sun had set and the fire burned low, Samuel reflected on the week's events. He realized that the girl had changed him in ways he could not have imagined. He had begun to see the world through her eyes, noticing details and patterns he had never considered. He understood that strength was not about controlling others. It was about understanding, adapting, and respecting life in all its forms. The following morning, a small conflict arose. Samuel had arranged some of the supplies near the campfire, and the girl began to move them to a better location without asking. At first, he felt a surge of irritation. Why are you moving them? He asked sharply. She looked at him calmly. This arrangement will make it easier to reach food and water quickly, she explained. It is safer for both of us, and for the horses. Samuel paused, realizing that she was correct. He had assumed that his plan was the best, but her observation had improved it. He felt a quiet sense of shame for doubting her judgment, and a growing respect for her insight. Days turned into weeks, and their bond deepened. Samuel began to rely on her guidance more than his own instincts. He learned to notice the small details she pointed out, the tracks of animals, the signs of approaching weather, the safest paths through the plains. The girl in turn shared stories of her people, teaching him about traditions, values, and ways of thinking that were foreign to him, but full of wisdom. Despite their growing partnership, the cowboy still faced moments of internal struggle. He was accustomed to being in control, and letting go of that need was difficult. But each time he attempted to dominate, he was reminded of her independence, intelligence, and quiet strength. Slowly, he began to understand that true leadership required humility, patience, and the willingness to learn from others. One afternoon, as they walked near a stream, Samuel asked a question he had been thinking about for days. Why do you stay with me? He asked cautiously.
You could leave any time.
You don't owe me anything. The girl looked at him steadily, her eyes calm and unwavering.
I stay because we can learn from each other, she said.
You have strength and courage, and I have knowledge and patience. Together we can survive and understand more than we could alone. But you must respect me, and I must respect you. That is the only way this will work. Samuel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that their relationship was no longer about ownership or obedience. It was about partnership, trust, and mutual respect. He understood that she had entered his life not to be controlled, but to teach him lessons he could not learn alone. As the sun set and the plains glowed with the last light of day, Samuel and the girl prepared for another night in the open. The fire crackled between them, a small source of warmth against the cool evening air. Samuel reflected on the journey so far, the storms they had faced, the lessons learned, and the bond that had grown between them. He understood now that the girl's warning from the very first day had been true. He could not control her, and he could not force obedience, but he could learn from her, grow with her, and discover a new way of seeing the world. And in that understanding, he found a sense of peace and purpose he had never known before. The night was quiet except for the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant howl of a coyote. Samuel lay on his bedroll, staring at the stars, thinking about the lessons of the past weeks. He realized that the journey with the girl had transformed him, teaching him humility, patience, and the true meaning of respect. And as sleep took him, he felt a quiet anticipation for the days ahead. The girl had changed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand, and he knew that the journey was far from over. The plains stretched endlessly before them, full of challenges, lessons, and discoveries, and Samuel was ready to face them with a new perspective, one shaped not by control, but by understanding and respect. The morning was calm, with sunlight spilling gently across the wide plains. The air smelled fresh, mixed with the scent of wet grass and earth from the previous night's rain. Samuel stirred from his bedroll, slowly waking to the sounds of birds singing and the distant movement of horses. He looked across the camp and saw the girl already awake, tending to the fire with quiet efficiency. She moved as if she belonged to the land itself, a natural part of the environment, blending strength with grace. Samuel had changed so much since the day he had first paid $2 to bring her to his camp. At first he had thought of her as someone he could control, someone whose obedience he could buy. Now he saw her differently, not as property, but as a person of remarkable courage, intelligence, and independence. And in turn, she had taught him lessons about humility, patience, respect, and true leadership. He realized that his understanding of power had been shallow. She had shown him that strength was in knowledge, wisdom, and choice, not force or ownership. The day began like any other, with routine tasks, feeding the horses, gathering water, and checking the traps for signs of game. But there was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that today would mark an important moment in their journey. Samuel worked quietly, giving her space, observing how she approached every task with confidence and precision. Every movement she made seemed intentional, calculated for the best possible outcome. It reminded him that true skill came from thought, observation, and care, not mere effort or muscle. Around mid-morning a challenge arose, a sudden change in weather, subtle at first, with clouds moving quickly across the horizon and a chill in the wind. Samuel instinctively reached for his tools, ready to act, but the girl stopped him. "Wait," she said calmly. "Do not rush. The storm will pass this way, but if we move too soon, we risk wasting energy and causing unnecessary danger." Samuel paused, taking her advice. He watched as she guided him through the steps of preparing for the wind without panicking or acting hastily. She pointed out secure spots to reinforce their shelter, ways to keep the horses calm, and small adjustments to their traps and supplies that could make a big difference. Once again, he marveled at her ability to anticipate problems before they became serious. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint scent of rain. Samuel felt a surge of gratitude. She had saved them before, during the first storm, and now he realized that she had been teaching him through these experiences. Survival on the plains was not simply a matter of strength. It was about observation, planning, and staying calm under pressure. He understood that she had entered his life to teach him this very lesson, that control was an illusion, but understanding could change everything. When the storm passed, the plains were bathed in sunlight, and the ground glistened with dew. Samuel and the girl continued their tasks, each step filled with quiet efficiency. They moved through the landscape almost as one, though their connection was not of submission and authority. It was mutual respect. Samuel could feel the bond between them deepening, a bond forged through shared experiences, challenges, and the lessons of survival. Later that afternoon, Samuel made a conscious decision. He sat down near the creek and watched the girl work. "I want to say something," he began hesitantly. "I've been wrong about so many things. I thought I could own you, control you, or make you obey. But I see now that you cannot be owned, and I wouldn't want to. You've taught me more than I could ever imagine." The girl looked at him, her eyes steady and calm. "It is not about teaching or controlling," she said softly. "It is about understanding." You have learned to listen, to observe, and to respect. That is the lesson. And you have learned it well. Samuel felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time, he truly understood that their journey had not been about power or possession. It had been about growth, learning, and transformation. He realized that the girl had changed him more than he could have anticipated, reshaping his ideas of respect, freedom, and what it meant to be strong. The evening came, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the plains were painted in hues of pink and gold. Samuel and the girl prepared a small meal, sitting together near the fire. The air was filled with the quiet sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the gentle clatter of water from the nearby creek. In that peaceful moment, Samuel realized that the bond between them was no longer defined by fear, obligation, or authority. It was defined by understanding, trust, and respect. Days passed, and the girl eventually approached Samuel with a serious expression. "It is time," she said. "I must decide my own path. I have learned much here, but I cannot remain because someone paid for me. That would be wrong." Samuel felt a mixture of sadness and understanding. He had grown attached to her, not out of possession, but because he respected and admired her. He nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "I understand. You have every right to choose, and I am grateful for everything you have taught me. I will not stop you from going where you need to go." The girl smiled faintly, a gesture of quiet pride and affection. "Thank you," she said, "and I will carry what I have learned here, as you will." The land teaches us both, in different ways, but always with the same lesson: respect life, respect others, and respect yourself. When the day came for her to leave, Samuel walked with her to the edge of the plains. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the ground. She looked back once, meeting his gaze. "Remember," she said softly, "obedience is not strength, but understanding is. Keep learning, and you will never be lost." Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I will," he replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for everything." The girl turned and walked away, her silhouette strong against the endless horizon. Samuel watched her go, feeling both pride and a quiet ache. He understood now that her departure did not mark an ending, but a transformation. She had left him with lessons far greater than any he could have imagined. When he had first paid $2, he had learned that freedom, respect, and understanding were worth far more than money or control. In the days that followed, Samuel continued his life on the plains, but he was not the same man he had been. He approached the land with new awareness, observed the animals and weather more carefully, and treated the people he encountered with patience and respect. The girl's teachings had become a part of him, shaping his decisions, his relationships, and his sense of self. Stories of their time together spread quietly among the nearby settlements. People spoke of the young cowboy and the brave girl, not as a tale of ownership, but as a story of courage, respect, and the power of understanding. Samuel often shared the lessons he had learned, emphasizing the importance of listening, patience, and humility. And though the girl had gone her own way, her presence remained in his thoughts, a constant reminder of the life-changing experience they had shared. Years later, Samuel would look back on that time with gratitude. He would remember the first day he had paid $2 and met a girl who refused to obey. He would remember the storms, the lessons, and the quiet moments by the fire. Most of all, he would remember the transformation, the realization that respect cannot be bought, strength cannot be forced, and true understanding comes only when one listens with humility. And though their paths had diverged, the bond they shared, the lessons, the trust, and the respect, remained eternal. Samuel knew that the girl had changed his life, and he carried her teachings with him every day, living a life guided not by control, but by wisdom, patience, and understanding.